I'm no stranger to ultrawide monitors and have been using one now for over 18 months nearly every day for both content creation and gaming. Although for a while I felt like my previous display was lacking in a few areas, and I decided to pull the trigger on this 34-inch LG Ultragear monitor, specifically the 34GP83A-B. For a quick rundown of what we're dealing with, this is a nano IPS display that has a 21:9 aspect ratio with a resolution of 3440 by 1440, a 1 millisecond response time, kinda more on that later, and a max refresh rate of 160Hz when overclocked. All that together makes this one of the best options in my opinion for both gaming and productivity. It's perfect for someone like myself who does creative work on a MacBook but then games on a custom PC. Right off the bat, I do want to mention that LG sells a very similar monitor that pretty much looks identical to this one. It's the GN950. It has an MSRP of $200 more and is pretty much the exact same besides some very minor hardware differences. The logo on the back is different, and there's like extra HDMI cables included, but that's it. So this monitor I'm reviewing, the GP83A-B, is the one to go with. Starting off the review by talking about the design, I definitely like what LG did here. The bezels on the top and sides are very thin, with the bottom being just slightly thicker and having a tiny LG logo. While the backside has more of a gamer look to it, the front blends into the rest of my setup while looking super sleek. I've always thought that a single ultrawide looks a lot cleaner on the desk than dual monitors, and this display here is no exception. While you're still getting the same height of roughly 14 inches that you would on a 27-inch monitor, you do lose out on some screen real estate that you would have otherwise had with two, but in my opinion, I think it's worth the trade-off for the level of immersion you get in games and the seamless experience when working on it, since you're not having that bezel in between. I find that this 34-inch size is great for having multiple tabs open when researching and scripting for videos like this one, or editing videos when I want to keep my Notion document at hand to keep track of all the B-roll shots I'm including. Another highlight of this design is the screen's curve, which has a radius of 1900R. I'm a really big fan of it. It is pretty subtle, but it's especially nice for gaming to put more of the screen into your peripheral vision. However, worth noting is that there are some use cases where this curve can actually be more of a con than a pro. So if you are doing any professional work where having precision is really important, like working with CAD files for example, then you're definitely going to want to stay away from a panel like this one. The build of the monitor is solid, although nowhere near something from Alienware. It's a plastic construction like most other monitors, so I can't really say it's too disappointing. Turning around at the back, as I mentioned, the red ring gives it more of a gamer vibe, but since you'll almost never see it, you shouldn't be too concerned. Something worth noting is I actually had some issues when trying to get my BenQ light bar that I put on the monitor to stay on properly, as it's not able to clamp due to the way that the ring protrudes on the back. Looking down at the ports, we get DisplayPort 1.4, 2 HDMI 2.0s, 2 USB downstreams, 1 USB upstream, and a 3.5mm jack. While this is not a monitor that I recommend for consoles because neither the PS5 or Xbox Series X support ultrawide aspect ratios, you're either going to have a stretched image or black bars on the side. Hooking up the PS5 with HDMI, I was still able to get 120Hz in several games. Unfortunately, something lacking with the ports is USB-C. That was one of the main reasons that I went with my previous monitor, as it allowed me to connect my MacBook with both display and power all on a single cable, whereas now I have to have it connected to power with MagSafe and then hooked up to the monitor with a USB-C to DisplayPort cable. Though I'd still bet that for 90% of you this is not an issue at all because you're already planning on using DisplayPort to take advantage of the refresh rate. All that's included in the box of the monitor is the power cable and a DisplayPort cable, meaning that if you do want to connect over HDMI, you'll need to buy one separately. To use the two USB-A ports at the back, you'll need to get a USB-B cable that plugs into the monitor's upstream and then into your PC. This is a super convenient way to plug in my light bar, but I have had some issues when trying to connect my monitor light strips to it. There doesn't seem to be enough power delivery or something, as it causes them to flicker and the controller just stops working to even turn off the lights. Once I instead plugged it straight into the PC, the issues went away, so I'm not too sure if this is a problem with the monitor or the lights themselves. Lastly, you do get a 3.5mm jack to connect some headphones or speakers, but let's actually turn up the volume of these built-in speakers and have a listen.
Hey, yo, I can't hear anything.
Okay, I'm kidding, there actually is no built-in speakers, but for me, this isn't an issue. I have these Audio Engine desktop speakers, as well as I always game with headphones on, which I think the same could probably be said for all of you, although I'm never going to complain about having that last resort. With this monitor measuring 34 inches diagonally, it takes up quite a bit of room on the desk and is definitely something you should make note of before going out and buying one. You want to make sure that if you do use the included stand, you'll have enough clearance underneath if you want to have any peripherals like speakers. My desk measures about 47 inches long and 27 inches deep, and I can just barely fit my PC build, MacBook, and the monitor all on here. But speaking of the stand, the one that's included in the monitor is decent, but I'm honestly not the biggest fan of it. It's made of plastic and doesn't feel very high quality, which is a bummer for the $800 that you do pay for this monitor. You get height and tilt adjustability, but no swivel or rotation. It's pretty easy to set up, you just need to snap it in and out at the back, and then the two raised feet at the front make room for cables to run underneath. There's a hook at the back for cable management, but it's really not that great of a solution, and with all the ports I have plugged in back here, they tend to sag down a bit. The stand itself is black with red accents, which is a big reason I actually swapped it out for the stand I use. With the black, white, and blue vibe I'm going for in my setup, it does feel a little out of place. I'm actually just using the stand from my previous LG Ultrawide because it is the exact same locking mechanism, and I just prefer its minimal silver design. The monitor does shake slightly on it, and it doesn't have quite as much range of motion, but really, it's fine for me. I would love to base mount it to a monitor arm, which is possible with the 100 by 100mm mount at the back, but with my IKEA Lim on tabletop, I'm pretty sure it would snap trying to hold up the weight of this thing. But going back to the weight of the monitor, it comes in at just under 12 pounds without the stand and just under 17 in width, meaning that it's not going to go anywhere, which is both good and bad. It won't be falling over on your desk, but when it comes time to move, you better roll up your sleeves. With gaming, you need to have a super beefy card in order to have good performance at 4K, making 1440p a really good middle ground as it's a pretty solid improvement from 1080. The display has a pixel density of 109 ppi, which makes everything super clear, text isn't fuzzy unless you're real up close, and the picture in general just looks great. With this ultra wide aspect ratio, you have to push even more pixels than a standard 16 by 9 1440p monitor, so you'll get a significant hit in performance. My PC build's rocking the 2070 Super, and it's able to push over 160 FPS in games like Rainbow Six Siege and Valorant, but once you start playing those like Warzone or Cold War, you're going to begin to feel the effects. I can usually get around 80 to 90 FPS in Warzone and 120 FPS in Cold War, which is still a very smooth experience and a huge step up from the 75Hz I was stuck at on my previous Ultrawide. Gaming at this resolution is honestly amazing and something that I recommend everyone try out at some point. The level of immersion you get is unreal, especially with the slight curve of the display. I think it shines the most in single player games like Red Dead Redemption 2 or Lego Star Wars, with beautiful terrains that you get to experience in a truly beautiful way. There definitely is a major trade-off though. While some well-optimized or just less graphic intensive games can run with no issues matching this monitor's 160Hz refresh rate, games like Cyberpunk and Red Dead really struggle to even get 60 FPS if you don't have a 3090. Also worth noting is game support. For the most part these days, any AAA title that releases will support this aspect ratio with no issues, but many old games and even some newer titles like Valorant don't, meaning that the game will take up a 16 by 9 portion of the screen, leaving black bars to fill the remaining space. I'd recommend you take a look at the games you'll be playing most often to see if they do support ultra-wide resolutions, but honestly, I put in so many hours into games like Life is Strange and The Walking Dead with the black bars that I've really gotten used to it. In my opinion, it's worth a trade-off for the immersive experience that you do get in the titles that take advantage of it, and the extra screen real estate for when you're working on the monitor. So the refresh rate of this panel is 144Hz or 160Hz when overclocked. Straight out of the box, it's set to 144Hz, but the process of switching it takes no more than 30 seconds. Just click the bottom joystick in, go over to the menu, then down to Game Adjust, go over to Overclock setting, and make sure to set to on. Now in the menu, it should show the monitor is running at 160Hz, but if not, just go into NVIDIA control panel, click on the change resolution at the side, and then go into the refresh rate box and select 160. Alternatively, you can do the same thing by going into Windows Settings, Display, Advanced Display, then selecting 160Hz in a dropdown. Do note that if you want to use the monitor in 10-bit color, 160Hz is only compatible with 8-bit, so you'll need to drop down to 144Hz if that's something you care about. I mentioned earlier that I'm using a USB-C to DisplayPort cable when the monitor is connected to the Mac, and this allows me to take full advantage of this refresh rate. I will have a link in the description for any Mac users who are interested. Once the cable is plugged in and I go to my display settings and system preferences, I get the option to increase the refresh rate up to 160. However, I have had some issues with the settings saving, and every time I turn off the monitor and come back, it ends up switching to an adaptive 48 to 160, which for my use has felt a little off, definitely not as smooth. I tried hooking up the Mac with an HDMI cable, as HDMI 2.0 should allow 144Hz at 1440p, but the only options that showed up for me were 50 and 85Hz. With my previous monitor from LG being 75Hz, the jump to 160 is just night and day. Obviously, playing games like Valorant just feels buttery smooth and responsive, but even just scrolling around the desktop, editing videos, browsing Steam, it all feels so fluid. While I do more work on this monitor than straight gaming, I'm so happy to have this refresh rate, and now I just cannot see myself getting another monitor that's not at least 144Hz. With the 160Hz max refresh rate, it's important that your monitor is matching the output of your GPU, so luckily this one is GSync compatible, though not supported, which in my opinion is a big bummer at this price point. There's actually no GSync hardware in here, rather it just has FreeSync Ultimate, which then can be used on NVIDIA cards. It's not a deal breaker, but a little annoying considering there are very similar options like the Alienware 34-inch IPS model that does have real G-Sync. But once a monitor does connect on Windows, you should get a notification that pops up about a compatible display being connected, and it will guide you through that process. The panel found on this monitor is an IPS one, and it is just beautiful. The colors are super accurate with a 98% coverage of the DCI-P color gamut and roughly 135% of the sRGB color space. Straight out of the box, they're super impressive. I think it's pre-calibrated, but still worth making a few tweaks to get it to your liking. With this, I'm super comfortable editing all of my photos and videos on this display. I find that what I see on here is pretty consistent when viewing it across various different screens. While the micro LED display found on my 16-inch MacBook looks phenomenal, I found that the color corrections I made on it didn't really translate well when you looked at it on other displays. So this is great to see that the LG monitor is so capable. This has truly become my main monitor to create on. But aside from that, the color accuracy is beautiful while gaming as well, making the environments look stunning in this wide aspect ratio. I mentioned this is a 10-bit panel and it has 400 nits of brightness, which isn't the brightest of any monitor out there, but I found that for my use it's been perfect. I haven't had any real issues with reflections or trouble seeing the monitor, even with windows open on the side and light shining on it. It's advertised as having HDR10, but it's really a joke. It was the same deal with my last ultrawide. You really need to have 700 plus nits of brightness before you can really have true HDR, really experience the benefits of it. On here, the colors just look super washed out when it's turned on. Now, with it being an IPS panel, the viewing angles are fantastic. No matter where you're looking at it from, there's basically no color shift, so it is great if I start slouching at the desk but still want to see what's going on. Although this panel really does have its drawbacks, IPS glow is present mostly when you're on a black screen, so in a game that doesn't natively support the 21:9 aspect ratio, you may encounter some problems. The contrast ratio on here is 1000:1, which isn't crazy impressive, but not so much an issue with the monitor, but rather IPS panels in general. Essentially, the difference in the darkest and brightest parts of the image isn't as drastic as on a VN or OLED, but for gaming and content creation, it really hasn't been that much of an issue for me. The monitor is advertised as having a 1 millisecond response time, but that's just not really the case, and ends up being more like 3 to 7 depending on the overdrive setting that you're using. I found that the fast is the best one to use, as it does give you the lowest response time with a manageable amount of overshoot. Using the UFO test, you can see that at the fastest setting, it's very easy to make out the trail being left due to inverse ghosting, whereas it's largely eliminated when going back to the fast setting. The last thing definitely worth noting about IPS panels is the reliability. So far, luckily, I have not had any issues, knock on wood, but dead pixels or just straight up broken panels are not rare. I actually had to return my last ultrawide twice before I finally got a model free of issues, so you definitely have to play the IPS lottery every time you buy a monitor like this one, but honestly, as long as the retailer you're purchasing from has a good return policy, you shouldn't have to worry too much. The OSD menu from LG is honestly really nice and super easy to navigate. You have this single joystick at the bottom, which is weirdly not placed under where the logo is, so I miss it every time I try to get at it, but really it is super intuitive. One click opens up the menu, with another closing it. Pushing it forward or backward changes the brightness, and side to side the volume if you do have a device plugged into the 3.5mm jack. Within the menu, you can quickly change inputs, change the game mode, and then make all of the game and picture adjustments like contrast, response time, etc, etc. I find the info bar above the different settings to be really nice, as it allows you to quickly check the refresh rate the monitor is currently running at, which overdrive setting you're using, and whether adaptive sync is working properly. But with all that said, this is the LG Ultragear 34GP83A-B. After using it for over a month, I can say that it is the perfect all-around monitor for both work and play. The IPS panel provides great color accuracy, which I find very beneficial when editing photos and videos, ensuring that what I see is consistent among the various screens it will be seen across. Paired with the 160Hz refresh rate, you get buttery smooth motion, which makes games like Valorant and Siege much more enjoyable, but also just working on the desktop feel more fluid as a whole. The design of the monitor is super sleek, but the stand has more of a gamery look that really comes down to personal preference. However, luckily it is base mountable, so that you can go out and purchase a different stand if you'd like. It's still definitely worth taking the cons into consideration. IPS panels are infamous for dead pixels, the contrast ratio isn't great, backlight bleed is present, and there are still plenty of games that don't support the aspect ratio, leaving you with black bars at each side. Although for me, the pros greatly outweigh the cons for this display, and I think for $800, it's not a bad deal. Let me know what you guys think of this LG Ultragear monitor. Will be making a feature in your setup, or are there still some things you're unsure about? If so, please feel free to drop a comment down below. There will be an Amazon affiliate link in the description if you're interested in checking this monitor out for yourself. But with that, I've been Cole, and I really appreciate you for sticking around to the end. If you enjoyed, make sure to drop a like and subscribe to the channel to see more tech and gaming related content in the very near future. All right, I'm heading out. Take care.